The open road was supposed to be freedom, a place of solitude, silence, and peace. But some roads were never meant to be traveled alone. What if your cargo whispered your name? What if your GPS led you straight into the unknown? What if the only voice on the radio wasn't human? Tonight, we ride into the darkest corners of the long haul. These aren't just stories. They're warnings from truckers who came back forever changed. If they came back at all. Trucking is a lonely life. Miles of nothing, endless highways, and the dead of night whispering secrets to those who dare to listen. But sometimes the silence breaks, and what fills it will haunt you forever. The stories you're about to hear are not urban legends. They're chilling, true accounts shared by truckers across North America. Men and women who encountered the unexplained while on the job. From phantom hitchhikers and cursed cargo to CB radios that speak in forgotten tongues. This is a ride you won't forget. Here are the 6 most disturbing true trucker horror stories. Buckle up. And whatever you do, don't stop for anything. Story number 1: The cargo that screamed. The freight manifest said, sealed medical equipment, loaded at 3:47 a.m. sharp at a privately owned warehouse just outside Cheyenne, Wyoming, bound for an anonymous drop location in rural Nevada. And for 32-year-old long-haul driver Damon Price, it was just another paycheck. No questions, no delays, no opening the container. But from the moment he backed his rig up to the loading dock, he knew something wasn't right, because the workers loading the crate wore no uniforms, no ID tags, and spoke to each other in short, whispered commands like soldiers rather than warehouse staff. And when they rolled out the crate, 8 feet long, 5 feet wide, and bolted shut with rivets instead of locks, one of them muttered under his breath, "Don't stop, no matter what you hear," before quickly turning away and disappearing into the shadows of the hangar. And Damon, half amused and half annoyed, chalked it up to overworked night crews and spooky small talk. But as he drove west into the vast darkness of the desert highway, the words stuck in his head, looping like a broken transmission. And about an hour into the drive, with the sun nowhere near the horizon and the moon a mere sliver in the sky, he heard it. Faint at first, a soft knock from inside the container, followed by silence, and he glanced in his mirrors, convinced it was just road noise or the wind pushing against the trailer. But then it came again, clearer this time, a tap-tap-tap in threes, followed by a muffled voice that sounded like it was trying to shout through layers of metal. And Damon's stomach turned, because the crate was not supposed to contain anything alive, let alone human. And despite the growing dread in his gut, he pushed on, trying to drown out the sounds with classic rock and energy drinks. But the tapping continued, persistent, now accompanied by soft sobbing, then laughter, then incoherent screaming that lasted exactly 13 seconds before cutting off mid-breath. And Damon pulled over. On the side of the road, heart pounding, trying to catch his breath, considering whether to break open the crate and check if someone had been trapped inside by mistake. But then his headlights flickered, just for a second, and when they came back on, there was someone standing in the middle of the road, right in front of his truck, wearing the same jumpsuit as the warehouse workers, face obscured by a reflective welding mask, and he didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared, completely still, like a statue. And Damon slammed the horn, yelled out the window, but the figure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, and the CB radio crackled to life, even though it had been turned off, emitting a single phrase in a mechanical, monotone voice. "Do not stop. Do not release. Cargo is listening." And Damon floored the gas pedal, tires squealing, and didn't let up for nearly an hour, driving blind into the night with sweat pouring down his back and the tapping inside the container growing more aggressive, now pounding in irregular bursts. And when he hit a rest stop to refuel, every light in the parking lot began flickering in sync with the pounding, and his radio started scanning stations by itself, landing on a broadcast that wasn't music, but a low, guttural humming noise followed by faint words spoken backward. And as he stood at the pump, a man approached him from behind, tall, gaunt, eyes wide like he hadn't slept in weeks, and said, "You shouldn't have stopped. It hears you when you stop," before turning and sprinting into the trees, disappearing without a trace. And when Damon looked back at his truck, the windshield was fogged from the inside, handprints clearly visible, smeared across the glass like something had been crawling around in there while he was away. And with trembling hands, he climbed back in, started the engine, and tore off into the night, the crate behind him now rattling violently like an animal thrashing inside a cage. And over The next 3 hours his headlights dimmed, the air inside the cab grew freezing, and his mirrors began showing reflections that didn't match reality. He'd glance up and see himself staring back with black eyes and a mouth open in a scream, even though he wasn't making a sound, and every electronic in the truck glitched. His GPS spinning in place, the dashboard clock stuck at 3:47, the exact time the crate had been loaded. And finally, just as the first rays of dawn began breaking over the Nevada hills, he reached the delivery location, a crumbling desert building that looked more like an abandoned church than a warehouse, and standing at the entrance were 3 people in dark robes, their faces obscured, holding metal tablets with scrolling red text, and they didn't speak, didn't gesture, just stood perfectly still as he backed the truck toward the unloading dock, and before he could get out, the trailer doors swung open by themselves. No one had touched them, and the crate slid backward, levitating slightly before descending into the shadows inside the building, and as the doors closed, Damon swore he heard someone inside the building whisper, "It's not contained anymore," followed by a scream so high-pitched it caused the glass on his dash to crack, and he didn't wait for payment, didn't collect a signature. He just floored it out of there and drove until his fuel light blinked red, eventually collapsing behind the wheel in a gas station parking lot 6 towns away. And when he finally came to, the trailer was gone, the back of his rig completely empty, with no record on his manifest of what had been inside. No paperwork, no delivery confirmation, nothing. And when he called the dispatcher, they told him there had been no such assignment in their logs, and that the warehouse he described had been closed for 10 years, condemned after a mass poisoning incident involving experimental drugs. And Damon tried to put it behind him, tried to move on, but things kept happening. He'd wake up in the middle of the night to find his fridge open and every item arranged in rows of 3s. His dog refused to go near the trailer, and once, while driving past a canyon at night, the radio came on and played back his own voice screaming, the exact scream he heard inside the crate, even though he'd never recorded it, and to this day, he swears he sees that same reflective mask in his rearview mirror every time he passes mile marker 147 on I-80, even if he's in a different truck, different route, different job, and he's never taken another sealed cargo job since then, because whatever was in that crate wasn't medical equipment. It was alive, aware, and angry, and every time he hears a knock in the night, part of him wonders if it finally found a way out. Story number 2: Dead frequency. Every trucker learns early on that the CB radio is more than just a tool. It's a lifeline, a voice in the dark, a constant hum of chatter that makes the endless road a little less lonely. But for Reggie, a 39-year-old hauler from Texas with a love for old-school rigs and midnight drives, that radio became a doorway to something he couldn't explain, something that changed his life forever one stormy night along the I-40. A night soaked in thunder and static, when the rain fell in thick sheets and the road ahead was barely visible through his wipers slapping at full speed, and he was somewhere between Amarillo and nowhere, cruising at 50 in near-zero visibility, when his radio crackled to life. Not unusual, except all known channels were silent due to weather interference, and what he heard wasn't your typical trucker banter, but a slow, warbling voice repeating one thing. "Breaker, breaker, 1717, come in." And he blinked, unsure if he was hallucinating, reaching for the volume knob cautiously, the voice growing clearer, distorted by static, but unmistakably human and deeply strained, like someone drowning in their own words, and he answered back, hesitating, "This is Midnight Runner, go ahead." And the silence that followed was so long. He thought maybe he'd imagined it, until the voice returned, louder this time. "Don't stop at the next station. It's not safe. You're being watched." And Reggie froze, chills racing down his spine despite the warmth of the cab, and he scanned the empty highway, checking his mirrors, the eerie feeling of being observed creeping up from his neck like cold fingers. But there were no lights behind him, no cars ahead, just the storm and the road. And his GPS said the next gas station was 20 miles away, a familiar one he'd stopped at dozens of times, a quiet place with friendly staff and good coffee. So why would someone warn him like that? And how did they know he was heading there? And more importantly, who were they? And he tried asking, "Who is this? Are you in trouble?" But all he got in return was a long, low tone, a buzzing noise that sounded mechanical but alive, almost like breathing through a machine. And then the radio went dead, no power, no lights, no signal, just silence, and his dashboard lights flickered momentarily before stabilizing, and despite his gut screaming at him, he decided to keep going, chalking it up to a storm-induced signal anomaly or some prank from another driver with a dark sense of humor. But when he reached the station 20 minutes later, the parking lot was empty, unusually so, and the entire place was bathed in a strange bluish light, not from any bulbs he could see, just an ambient glow that seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, and the gas pumps looked aged and corroded like they hadn't worked in years, even though he'd fueled up there just a week ago, and the store windows were completely dark, the neon open 24 hours, sign cracked and swinging loosely in the wind, and Reggie pulled up slowly, engine idling, trying to decide whether to get out or just keep driving, when his radio lit up again, by itself, and this time a new voice spoke, female, urgent and whispering, "You're already inside. You just think you're not." And that's when he realized he couldn't remember pulling off the road, couldn't recall the last 10 minutes of driving, like he'd blacked out while fully awake, and panic set in as he reached for his door handle, only to find it wouldn't budge, locked from the inside somehow, and the windows no longer showed the parking lot but a vast black space filled with blinking red lights floating in the air like eyes, and he screamed, slamming his fists against the door, trying to start the engine again, only to find it had died, everything powered off despite a full battery, and the CB radio glowed brighter, now emitting a high-pitched whine that grew sharper by the second, and through it he heard multiple voices all speaking at once, overlapping, some crying, some laughing, some begging to be let out, and in the confusion he spotted something outside his window, or what used to be his window, a figure in a trucker's uniform, face obscured by static, staring directly at him and mimicking his every move like a mirror, and Reggie turned away, hyperventilating, and when he looked back the figure was inside the cab with him, sitting in the passenger seat without having opened the door, breathing heavily, its chest moving but its face still nothing but a blur of shifting gray noise, and when it opened its mouth, he heard the same phrase again, "Breaker, breaker, 17, come in." And that's when everything went black, just gone, no pain, no sound, no awareness, and when he came to, he was parked on the shoulder of the highway, engine humming quietly, sun rising in the distance, and everything looked normal, like none of it had happened, except his radio was fried, burnt inside out, and his digital clock read 3:17, frozen, never changing no matter what he did, and the worst part was that no one else on the route remembered a storm that night, not a single drop of rain recorded, and that gas station, according to the local dispatch, it had burned down 2 years ago in a freak electrical fire, killing 3 people, including a lone trucker who'd been inside during the explosion, found clutching his CB mic and staring at the wall, eyes wide open and mouth agape like he'd seen something too vast to comprehend. And Reggie never used Channel 17 again, never drove at night unless absolutely necessary, and to this day he refuses to let any CB within his truck, saying if they talk to him again he might not come back this time because sometimes, especially when he's alone and the road is dead quiet, he hears static in his ears without any device on, and sometimes it whispers his name, always just once, clear and precise, and in those moments he wonders if he really made it back, or if he's still inside that black place where red lights blink like watchful eyes, and all he did was dream his way out. Story number 3, the rest stop coffin. Every trucker has a horror story they keep locked away, something they swear never happened but can't quite forget. And for Elias, a long-haul driver with nerves of steel and a heart calloused by decades of open road isolation, it was the coffin. Yes, a literal coffin, that he once found at a rest stop in rural Kentucky, nestled just off a forgotten side road between 2 hills and shrouded in mist so thick you could barely see your own breath. And it all began during a routine delivery run through the Appalachian backroads, the kind of route no GPS favors and only the most experienced truckers dare to take. But Elias wasn't fazed by sharp turns or pitch-black forest roads until that one night, that one cursed stop, when he felt an overwhelming urge to pull over at a rest area he didn't remember seeing on the map, the sign reading "Winding Pines 2 miles ahead," barely illuminated by his high beams. And something about the name felt off, like a whisper in the back of his skull, telling him to keep driving, but his eyes were heavy, the kind of tiredness no amount of caffeine could kill, so he figured he'd stop for a few minutes, just to splash his face with water and stretch his legs, and as he pulled in, he noticed the area was eerily well kept for such an out-of-the-way place, the asphalt too smooth, the trees too symmetrical, and the fluorescent lights didn't flicker like usual. They buzzed in perfect sync, like a rhythm keeping time for something he couldn't hear. And the lot was empty completely, not even a stray car or RV in sight, which was unusual for a late-night rest stop, and the bathroom doors stood open, pristine, almost inviting, but Elias couldn't shake the tension building in his chest, like walking into a room where someone had just been talking about you. So he left the engine running, keeping the headlights pointed at the restroom, and stepped out, the cold hitting him like a slap, dry and unnatural. And as he approached the entrance, he spotted it, just beyond the far edge of the lot, under one of the overhead lights. An old-fashioned wooden coffin, dark and glossy, sitting upright like someone had just delivered it and left. And it was completely out of place, no vehicle nearby, no tire tracks in the dust, no marks on the ground, just the coffin standing there like it belonged. And despite every screaming instinct in his body telling him to get back in the truck, Elias stepped closer, drawn in like a moth to flame, the silence growing heavier with each step until he stood directly in front of it, the lid slightly ajar as if inviting him to peek inside, and when he did, he recoiled. The inside wasn't empty, but it wasn't what he expected either, for instead of a body, it contained a mirror, a large, antique mirror bolted to the interior with ornate golden trim, and when Elias looked into it, he didn't see his own reflection. Instead, he saw himself lying inside the coffin, eyes closed, hands folded, pale as death, and then the mirror flickered, showing him images of his own truck veering off a cliff, flames engulfing the cab, his lifeless body thrown into the woods, and he stumbled back, heart pounding, convinced it was some sick prank, maybe a weird art installation. But when he turned around, the rest stop was gone. Completely, utterly gone. No truck, no road, no lights, just dense forest surrounding him on all sides. And the coffin still standing there, now humming, emitting a low, guttural tone that vibrated his bones, and Elias began to run, directionless, branches clawing at his clothes, roots tripping his feet, the forest closing in like a noose, and he ran until he found the rest stop again. But everything had changed, now decayed and broken down, like it had been abandoned for years, graffiti covering the walls, weeds sprouting through the cracks, and his truck sat exactly where he'd left it. But the windows were fogged up from the inside, and when he yanked the door open, the interior was ice cold, his radio hissing static, and sitting on the passenger seat was a newspaper clipping, old and yellowed, with a headline that read, "Trucker found dead in coffin at Winding Pines rest stop," dated 23 years prior, and the photo showed a truck identical to his, and a man identical to him, lying in the coffin, and he screamed, dropped the paper, started the truck, and peeled out of there faster than he'd ever driven in his life, not stopping until he hit a major highway, panting and covered in sweat. And to this day, he doesn't know how much of it was real, but strange things began happening after that. Mirrors fogging up when no one else was in the room, reflections lingering a second too long, and once, in a diner bathroom, he saw a glimpse of the coffin behind him before blinking it away. And one night, parked in a rest area 3 states away, he woke up to find the passenger seat empty but still cold, and the smell of wood varnish heavy in the air, and scrawled on his rearview mirror in fog was the phrase, "Your space is ready." And ever since then, Elias avoids any rest stop not listed on official maps, never sleeps more than an hour at a time, and keeps all his cab mirrors covered with duct tape, even the side ones, because he swears they're doorways now, windows to something that keeps watching him, waiting for the right moment. And every time he drives past a coffin on the back of a funeral truck, he wonders if it's the same one, if it's following him. And sometimes when he's nearly asleep behind the wheel, he hears that hum again, faint, just under the sound of the tires on the road, calling him back to Winding Pines, back to the place that shouldn't exist. And though he's tried to convince himself it was a hallucination, maybe caused by exhaustion or bad food, deep down, he knows the truth, that he looked into the mirror, that he saw his own end, and now it's coming for him, slow and steady, one rest stop at a time. Story number 4: The Midnight Hitchhiker. They say no trucker should ever pick up a hitchhiker after midnight, especially not on Highway 50, better known as the loneliest road in America, a stretch of desolate asphalt cutting through Nevada like a forgotten scar, where time feels slow, the sky presses down hard, and the road seems to go on forever. And on one especially cold October night, when the moon barely lit the desert and the air was so still it almost felt fake, Thomas, a seasoned long hauler with nearly 20 years behind the wheel, saw her, standing by mile marker 173, a woman in a red jacket with her thumb out and a blank expression on her face, as if she'd been standing there for hours, maybe longer. And he knew the rules. He knew the stories whispered in truck stops and CB chats, But something about her made him slow down anyway. Maybe it was the way she didn't even flinch when his headlights hit her. Or maybe it was the eerie sense of familiarity that chilled him the second he saw her, like déjà vu carved into his bones. And so, against every instinct and all the tales that told him not to, he pulled over, hit the hazards, and rolled down the passenger window just a crack, asking, "You all right, ma'am?" And she turned slowly, her face pale, her eyes too wide like she was trying to see through him, and she nodded silently before speaking in a flat voice, "Just need to get to Fallon," which was still 2 hours east, and he hesitated before unlocking the door, the sound echoing louder than it should have. And she climbed in without a word, not thanking him, not asking any questions. Just sitting stiffly, hands in her lap, looking straight ahead, and the smell of dust and something faintly metallic filled the cab, and Thomas, uneasy now, tried to make conversation, asking, "So you from around there?" But she only replied, "Not anymore," and fell silent again, and the miles dragged on as tension coiled tighter in the air, and every few moments he'd glance over and see her still staring forward, never blinking, barely breathing. And when he reached for the CB to call in, she suddenly whispered, "Don't," and he froze, hand hovering over the mic, unsure how she knew, but obeying, and the silence that followed was thick and oppressive, like the air itself didn't want to move. And as the desert rolled by in silver-gray shadows, he began to notice strange things. The dashboard clock was frozen at 12:08, even though he'd been driving for at least 30 minutes. The gas gauge flickered erratically even though he'd just filled up, and the road ahead looked the same. Every time he checked, the same bend, the same cactus, the same flickering sign in the distance that never got closer. And when he finally mustered the courage to ask her again where she was going, she said, "I'm already there," in a voice so hollow it made his chest ache, and when he turned to look at her, she was gone. No sound, no door opening, just gone like she had evaporated into thin air. And the passenger seat was empty but still indented like someone had just been sitting there, and the smell of metal was stronger now, making him gag, and Thomas slammed the brakes, heart hammering, stepping out into the cold night, looking around, shouting for her. But there was no one, nothing but wind and the lonely creak of his cooling engine. And when he climbed back in, shaken and trying to make sense of it, he looked into the side mirror and saw her face, blank, pale, expressionless, staring back at him from the sleeper compartment, even though it had been locked the entire time. And when he turned around, she wasn't there, but the curtain swayed as if someone had just slipped behind it, and he refused to open it, refused to look, just started driving again, praying for dawn. And finally, after what felt like hours, he saw the lights of Fallon, pulled into the first truck stop he saw, practically jumping out of the cab and running inside, where other drivers sat sipping coffee and nursing road weariness. And he blurted out the whole story, and one older trucker just nodded slowly and said, "Mile marker 173. You saw her too?" And Thomas, still shaking, asked, "Who is she?" And the man said she'd been picked up by a driver years ago, late at night, just like him, wearing a red jacket, heading to Fallon, but she never made it. She was murdered somewhere along that stretch, dumped in the desert, and now she hitchhikes every October, hoping someone will take her all the way. And Thomas, trying to breathe, asked, "But why me?" And the old man replied, "You looked. That's all it takes. She finds the ones who see her, and she doesn't forget." And Thomas never took that route again, rerouting hundreds of miles out of the way to avoid mile marker 173. But it didn't matter, because weeks later, he started seeing red. First a scarf left on his dash, then a jacket folded neatly on the passenger seat, even though he hadn't stopped to pick anyone up. And then came the dreams, always the same. Him driving through the desert, her sitting silently beside him, face emotionless, voice whispering almost there, over and over again. And he began sleeping in motels instead of the sleeper, afraid she'd appear again in the dark behind the curtain. And once, while fueling up, another driver glanced into his cab and asked, "You traveling with someone?" And Thomas said no, and the man paled and said, "I just saw a woman sitting in your seat." And from that day forward, Thomas kept the passenger seat empty, never letting anyone sit there, not even for a moment, because it belonged to her now, always her. And he knew deep down that she wasn't done with him, that he hadn't taken her far enough, and until he did, she'd keep following, keep riding along in silence, a ghost in red who only wanted to get to Fallon, but never could, and maybe never would. And Thomas started losing track of time on the road, hours vanishing without memory, days blending together, and the more he drove, the more he felt her presence, like invisible weight on the seat beside him, like cold fingers brushing the steering wheel. And once, when he passed mile marker 173 again, despite rerouting, despite every intention, he saw her on the road, waiting, thumb out, eyes empty, and she smiled as he passed, and the smile chilled his blood because it wasn't just recognition. It was triumph, as if she knew he'd be back, as if he never really left, and now Thomas lives in fear of the road, of the mirror, of midnight rides through the desert. And he doesn't use his CB anymore, doesn't listen to music, just drives in silence, listening. For the moment she speaks again, and she will, because she always does, and when she does, she'll say what she always says. Just need to get to Fallon, and he'll keep driving, knowing no destination will ever be far enough to leave her behind. Story number 5, CB Channel 13. It started as just another long haul through the cold flatlands of Nebraska, where the sky stretched wider than the road and the cornfields became shadows in the fog, and Rick, a trucker with 12 years under his belt, flipped through his CB radio channels like he always did, hoping for chatter to keep the silence at bay. But on that particular night, something strange came through on Channel 13, a frequency truckers rarely used, regarded as bad luck or cursed, and most avoided it completely. But Rick wasn't superstitious, and when he heard the static clear into a faint voice calling, "Is anyone out there?" he figured someone might be broken down, in trouble, or bored like him, and he keyed up the mic and responded, "Yeah, driver, I hear you. What's your 20? But there was only silence, followed by a loud click, and then the voice again, quieter now. "I need help. I can't find the road." And Rick sat up straighter, eyes narrowing, because there were no turns for miles and no exits either, just straight 2-lane blacktop, and something about the way the voice sounded, faint, lost, hollow, gave him chills, so he asked again, "Where are you?" And this time the answer was different. "I don't know anymore. It's dark. So dark." And Rick, thinking maybe someone had wrecked off the road or gotten stuck in the fields, pulled over, flipped on his hazards, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped outside, scanning the dense fog that now curled unnaturally around the truck, muting even the sound of the engine. And then the radio crackled again, only this time louder, and the voice came through clearer. "Don't leave the truck. He's out there." And Rick spun around, heart thudding, staring into the white wall of fog. But there was nothing, just the corn rustling, and he climbed back into the cab, locking the doors, suddenly aware of how wrong the night felt. And just then, another voice, deeper, almost growling, came over Channel 13, snarling, "Get off my road," followed by harsh static that buzzed like a scream, and Rick switched to another channel. Nothing, silence, dead air. So he switched back, thinking maybe his radio was glitching, but Channel 13 was alive again, playing what sounded like a recording of brakes squealing, tires skidding, and a sickening crunch, followed by the same hollow voice from before whispering, "It hurts. Make it stop, please." And Rick sat frozen, fingers hovering over the switch, unsure whether to turn it off or listen. And then he saw it. Headlights in the rearview mirror, too bright, too high, bearing down on him fast, and before he could react, a massive semi passed him at impossible speed, silent as death, with no driver visible behind the wheel. Just a shadow slumped in the seat, and as it passed, the fog pulled with it like a cloak, revealing deep gouges in the road where no vehicle should have left tracks. And Rick, now shaking, started driving again, faster than before, wanting nothing more than to reach the next town, the next stop, anywhere but here. But the voice returned, whispering, "He's behind you." And Rick looked in the mirror and saw nothing, but the weight of being watched settled on his shoulders like chains, and for the next 30 minutes, he drove without music, without chatter, heart pounding, until the CB crackled once more and another trucker's voice came through. Not ghostly this time, but real, firm, saying, "You hear it too?" And Rick grabbed the mic and replied, "Yeah, Channel 13. And the other driver said, "Don't answer them. Ever. They're not alive. They're not looking for help, they're looking for you." And then the line went dead again, and the chill that followed was worse than before, as if the air itself remembered something, and Rick kept driving, refusing to stop, even as the fog returned, thicker, colder, until the road seemed to vanish beneath his tires, and for a moment, it felt like the whole world narrowed to just him, the truck, and the static whispering from the CB. And then came the voice again, clearer than ever, whispering his name, his full name, which he had never spoken over the radio, and that's when panic set in, real, crushing fear. And he yanked the radio cord out, tossing it on the passenger seat, trying to breathe, trying to reason. But the damage was done, because that night, something on Channel 13 had learned his name, and it wasn't done with him yet, because even with the radio unplugged, he still heard it, faint, Under the roar of the engine, a voice from the dashboard vents saying, "Don't leave me." And Rick drove through the rest of the night in a kind of numb terror, eventually pulling into a rest stop at dawn where other truckers gathered, safe, normal, unaware, and he sat in his cab until the sun rose high, until the shadows finally backed away. But the feeling didn't leave, and when he told another driver about what happened, the man paled and said, "You picked up Channel 13? Jesus, that's not just static, it's a trap." And he explained that years ago, a convoy of 3 rigs vanished on this route. No crash, no wreckage, just gone, and the only trace was their last transmission on Channel 13. One trucker screaming, another crying, and the third whispering, "He's in the fog." And since then, Channel 13 had become a legend, the cursed frequency, where voices of the lost cried out to the living, trying to pull them in, to add them to the chorus. And Rick, shaken but skeptical, asked why nobody blocked the channel, and the other driver just shrugged and said, "You can't block the dead." And now, every time Rick drives alone at night, he swears the CB will crackle again, even when it's off, even when it's disconnected, and sometimes when the fog rolls in thick and the road grows too quiet. He hears his name again, not from the speaker, but from behind his seat, whispered in that same broken voice. And sometimes, in the distance, he'll see the other truck, the driverless rig with glowing lights, following for miles, never getting closer, never getting further, like a shadow of something waiting. And Rick has tried switching trucks, switching routes, even considered quitting, but it doesn't matter anymore, because once you answer Channel 13, once you engage, they know you, they remember, and they never stop calling. And no matter how loud your engine is, or how fast you drive, or how many times you change your name or number, eventually they'll find a way to reach you again, and if you answer, you won't be coming back. Story number 1: The Woman in White, on Route 491. It was the kind of night where the sky was so black it swallowed the stars, and the only sound Dale could hear was the steady hum of his 18-wheeler rolling along Route 491, formerly known as Route 666, the Devil's Highway, renamed after too many unexplained accidents haunted its path through New Mexico, and truckers like Dale, with decades of experience, knew better than to talk about it too much. But that night, Dale was alone, or so he thought, and the road ahead stretched endlessly into the void, lined with low hills and desert silence, until he spotted her, a pale figure on the roadside, wearing what looked like a long white dress, old-fashioned, almost glowing in the dim light of his headlights, and she wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at the truck as it approached, her arms limp at her sides, her face obscured by shadow. But Dale's instincts kicked in, and despite the stories, despite the warning bells in his head, he slowed the truck down and pulled over, thinking maybe she was lost or worse, hurt. But as soon as he stepped out of the cab and placed his boot on the sandy shoulder, she was gone, vanished, like she had never been there. And Dale looked around, heart pounding, flashlight scanning empty air, no footprints, no sound, just the wind picking up around the cacti and sagebrush, and he muttered to himself, blaming exhaustion, maybe even heat stroke, though the desert night was cold, and climbed back in, locking the door behind him, trying to shake the chill crawling up his spine. But 20 miles later, with the radio crackling softly and the road still silent, she appeared again, this time standing in the middle of the road, staring straight into his windshield, forcing Dale to slam on the brakes, tires screeching as the massive truck fishtailed slightly before grinding to a halt just inches from her still, ghostly figure. And for a brief moment, her face came into focus under the beams, pale, hollow-eyed, lips parted like she wanted to scream but couldn't, and then she vanished again like smoke in the headlights. And Dale, now panicking, checked his mirrors, scanned the road, but there was nothing, just empty highway and the faint echo of his breathing, his heart pounding like a war drum inside his chest. So he pressed on, needing to get far away from this cursed stretch, but the further he went, the more it felt like the air around him was getting colder, heavier, like something was following, unseen. And he didn't stop again until sunrise, parking his truck at a diner off the next town, hands trembling as he poured himself a coffee. And when the waitress noticed his state, she asked if he'd seen her too, and Dale froze, because he hadn't told anyone, not a soul. And she nodded slowly and said, "That road's cursed, you know, people see her all the time before bad things happen." And Dale asked what bad things, but she just looked down and walked away. And that's when Dale realized this wasn't a one-time sighting. This was something woven into the very fabric of Route 491, something that had taken root in the asphalt and refused to let go. And when he talked to the local sheriff later, the man just shook his head and said, "You saw her too?" Like it was routine, like it was normal for truckers to nearly crash over a vanishing woman, and Dale asked who she was, if she had a name. And the sheriff said nobody really knew, but the stories went back generations to a young woman killed on that stretch by a hit and run. Her body found days later, dress torn, eyes wide open in horror, and they never found the driver, and ever since, she's been seen walking, standing, waiting, always silent, as if stuck in the moment of her death, reliving it night after night. And truckers swear she's a warning, but others say she's a curse, that if you see her, she follows you, not physically, but spiritually, burrowing into your dreams, whispering things you can't unhear. And Dale didn't believe in ghosts before, not really. But now, every time he closes his eyes, he sees her face, pale and unblinking, and he hasn't driven Route 491 since, choosing longer detours just to avoid that haunted highway, even if it costs him time and money, because nothing is worth going back there, not after what he saw, and not after what came after, because weeks later, he started hearing footsteps in his sleeper cab at night, soft and deliberate. And one time, he woke up to find the cab door wide open, despite locking it tight, and the smell of desert air mixed with something older, like decay, filled his nose, and he thought he saw the edge of a white dress disappearing behind the trailer. But when he ran out, there was no one there, just tire tracks in the sand and his own confused breath steaming in the cold. And once, he left a voice recorder running overnight, hoping to catch the sound, but when he played it back, all he heard was static at first, then a woman's voice whispering, "Help me," over and over, until it crescendoed into a scream that made him drop the device. And the next day, it wouldn't turn back on, and still, every so often, he sees her on distant roads, in truck stop reflections, standing by the fuel pumps, unmoving, eyes fixed on him like she remembers, like she's waiting, always waiting. And Dale has told his story only a handful of times, always reluctantly, and every time he does, he swears it feels like she gets closer, like speaking of her gives her power, and yet he shares it because he knows someone else will see her, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, and they need to know not to stop, not to look, not to get out, because once you acknowledge her, she never truly goes away. And Dale keeps driving further and further from New Mexico, but no matter where he goes, the memories follow, and every empty road feels like Route 491. Every cold gust of wind makes him shiver, and every time he's alone at night, he knows deep down she's not far behind, watching from the roadside, waiting for the next driver who thinks kindness can save her, when all she really wants is someone to join her in the endless dark of that cursed highway. 6 stories, 6 drivers, 1 terrifying truth. The road remembers everything. So the next time you hear a knock from the trailer, or catch a glimpse of someone in your rearview mirror that shouldn't be there, ask yourself, are you sure you're alone? Thank you for riding with us tonight. If these stories chilled you to the core, make sure to like, subscribe, and share with a fellow night traveler. And remember, on the road, sometimes your worst nightmare isn't what's ahead. It's what's riding with you.